When Nazi Germany fell in May 1945, the world breathed a sigh of relief. But deep beneath the waves, hundreds of German submarines were still at sea, crewed by men who refused to believe the war was truly over. Days later, they surfaced in surrender, their once feared wolf packs broken and defeated. What followed was one of the strangest episodes in naval history, an operation not of battle, but of erasure. The Allies would raise, study, and deliberately destroy the very weapons that once terrorized the Atlantic. This is the haunting story of what happened to Hitler's U-boats after the war ended. At dawn on May 8, 1945, radio operators aboard Germany's remaining U-boats received the order that ended their world. Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's handpicked successor and former U-boat commander, had signed Germany's unconditional surrender. His message was clear. Every submarine was to cease operations, surface immediately, and surrender to the nearest Allied authority. After 6 years of underwater warfare, the U-boat arm of the Kriegsmarine was finished. Across the North Atlantic and the Norwegian fjords, conning towers broke the surface one after another. On the Bay of Biscay, in the North Sea, and as far north as Trondheim, over 150 submarines rose from the depths. Their crews, hungry, exhausted, and hollow-eyed, hoisted white flags on rust-streaked decks. Allied aircraft circled above, observing what looked less like a military surrender and more like a mass surfacing of ghosts. The Allies were unprepared for the scale of the surrender. Ports that had been bombed and blockaded during the war now became graveyards for submarines. At Loch Erebol in Scotland, nearly 40 U-boats anchored side by side, a grim metallic forest stretching across the bay. In Lissahalli, Northern Ireland, the Royal Navy received flotilla after flotilla of captured boats. American and British crews boarded each vessel, confiscating codebooks, charts, and torpedoes. Many submarines were in dreadful shape. Paint had peeled from their hulls. Diesel engines were seized from months of saltwater exposure. Inside, mold crept along bulkheads, and the smell of oil and decay filled the air. For the Allies, this was more than just a logistical nightmare. These vessels represented the pinnacle of wartime German engineering. The newest models, the Type WWII and Type WWII, were far ahead of anything the Allies had produced. Streamlined hulls, advanced batteries, and snorkel systems allowed them to operate submerged for days at a time. To British and American engineers, they were a glimpse of the future. To the Soviet Union, already watching from behind a widening iron curtain, they were a potential weapon in the next conflict. The question soon arose: what should be done with these submarines? Some believed they should be preserved for study. Others argued that the very existence of the U-boat fleet was too dangerous, a relic that could not be allowed to survive. By late 1945, the answer came in the form of a secret Royal Navy plan, Operation Deadlight. Operation Deadlight was not an act of vengeance. It was, in theory, a practical decision. Keeping the captured submarines afloat was expensive and risky. Many were unfit for further service. So, the Admiralty decided to destroy them, deliberately, methodically, and completely. Between November 1945 and February 1946, more than 100 German U-boats would be towed out into the North Atlantic and scuttled. The scale of the task was enormous. A total of 156 U-boats had surrendered to the Allies. Of these, 116 were marked for destruction. They would be taken to 3 designated dumping areas, codenamed XX, YY, and ZZ, roughly 100 miles northwest of Ireland. There, they would be sunk by gunfire, explosive charges, or by simply opening the valves and letting the sea reclaim them. The first convoys departed from Loch Ryan and Lissahalli in November 1945. Each tow consisted of several submarines lashed behind Royal Navy tugs, their black hulls trailing through stormy winter seas. Many never made it. The aging boats leaked and broke apart in heavy waves. Some were lost en route, dragged under by the weight of seawater seeping through their corroded hulls. By the time the first phase ended, nearly a third of the designated submarines had already sunk before reaching their final coordinates. Those that did survive the journey were destroyed with little ceremony. Royal Navy destroyers opened fire at close range, riddling the German boats with shell fire until they slipped beneath the waves. Some were targeted by aircraft rockets, others by controlled detonations. Each sinking was recorded, charted, and forgotten. Among those doomed to die was U-2336, the last German submarine to sink Allied ships during the war. It had torpedoed 2 merchant vessels just hours before Germany's surrender in May 1945. 8 months later, it too was towed into the Atlantic and sent to the bottom. Another, U-295, was destroyed off the coast of Ireland that December. The last to go was U-2511, a sleek Type WWII submarine that had briefly patrolled the Atlantic in the final days of the war. On February 7, 1946, it was scuttled, marking the symbolic end of the Kriegsmarine's submarine era. For decades, the Deadlight wrecks lay undisturbed, scattered across the seabed like silent tombstones. In 2001, maritime archaeologist Innes McCartney led expeditions to rediscover them. Using sonar and remotely operated vehicles, his team found more than a dozen remarkably preserved hulls, some upright, some twisted, all resting in eerie silence. The discoveries revealed how hastily the operation had been carried out. Torpedo tubes still loaded, periscopes extended, deck guns intact. In death, the submarines had retained a ghostly dignity. While most of the fleet was destroyed, a select few U-boats escaped their fate. To the victors, these were not just war trophies. They were technological prizes. The Tripartite Naval Commission, formed in August 1945, divided the captured submarines between Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Each received 10 boats for study, with priority given to the advanced Type WWII and Fighterfix models. In Britain, several U-boats were refitted for experimental use. The Royal Navy studied their hydrodynamics, propulsion systems, and submerged endurance. One of them, U-3017, was renamed HMS N41 and underwent a series of trials before being scrapped in 1949. Another U-190, which had surrendered off Newfoundland, was taken into Canadian service. For several years, it was used in training exercises, serving as a target for depth charge practice before being sunk ceremonially in 1947. Across the Atlantic, the United States Navy conducted its own studies at bases in Portsmouth and New London. Engineers examined the German systems that allowed near-silent running and extended underwater operation, innovations that would later influence the design of America's first post-war submarines. The capture of U-234, a massive cargo submarine intercepted on its way to Japan, proved particularly valuable. On board, US forces discovered a cargo of advanced materials, including uranium oxide and jet engine components, meant for Tokyo. U-234 was eventually used for weapons testing and sunk in 1947, but the intelligence gained from its design echoed in American naval development for years. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, captured U-boats were studied with intense interest. The Germans' Type WWII became the direct inspiration for the Soviet Whiskey-class submarines that soon prowled Arctic waters. Soviet engineers dismantled and reverse-engineered every component, from snorkel systems to pressure hull plating, giving their navy a sudden and formidable leap forward. To Western observers, it was a chilling realization. The same technology that once threatened Allied convoys now powered the fleets of their former allies. France, Norway, and Denmark also benefited from this distribution. France, still rebuilding from the devastation of occupation, integrated several U-boats into its post-war navy. One of them, U-123, renamed Blazon, served in active duty for years before retirement. Norway operated several captured vessels for coastal patrol, and Denmark incorporated German submarine designs into its post-war shipbuilding programs. Yet the redistribution of U-boats soon became more than a matter of engineering. It became a symbol of the emerging Cold War. What began as cooperative study turned into competition. The Allies had defeated Germany, but they now found themselves racing to control its technological legacy. In shipyards across the world, the lessons learned from the U-boats were shaping the next era of undersea warfare. By the late 1940s, most surviving submarines had been dismantled or scuttled, but their influence endured. The innovations of the Type 21, its hydrodynamic hull, advanced batteries, and silent propulsion, formed the foundation of nearly every conventional submarine built in the following decade. The design principles that guided the nuclear submarines of the 1950s could be traced directly to German blueprints recovered in 1945. In an ironic twist of history, the Kriegsmarine's final creation had become the blueprint for the Cold War. Still, not every U-boat was consigned to the deep. A handful survived to become relics, monuments to a vanished age of steel and silence. U-995, surrendered in Trondheim, served briefly with the Norwegian Navy before being returned to Germany. In 1972, it was restored as a museum ship at Labo, near Kiel, beside the towering Marine Ehrenmal Naval Memorial. Visitors stepping inside its narrow corridors today are struck by the oppressive confinement, the low ceilings, the clanging pipes, the smell of metal and oil that seems never to fade. In France, U-123's successor, Blazon, was preserved in Lorient, once one of the Kriegsmarine's most important U-boat bases. In England, U-534 was raised from the Kattegat Strait in 1993. And now rests in Birkenhead, its hull cut open so visitors can see the living quarters where 45 men once endured weeks beneath the sea. And across the Atlantic, one of the most famous survivors stands in the heart of Chicago. U-505, captured intact by the US Navy in 1944, became a major intelligence prize during the war. Today, it is displayed at the Museum of Science and Industry, the first enemy warship ever exhibited on American soil. Its presence is a stark reminder of both human ingenuity and human tragedy. The rest remain where they fell. The wrecks of Operation Deadlight still litter the seabed northwest of Ireland. Over 100 steel tombs lying in darkness. Some rest upright, perfectly preserved by the cold. Others are broken apart, their ribs exposed like the skeletons of deep-sea leviathans. They are silent now, but each hull tells a story of youth, fear, and the relentless machinery of war. For decades, few remembered them. Only in recent years have divers, historians, and maritime archaeologists begun to revisit the Deadlight graveyard, uncovering a world frozen in time. Every rivet and torpedo tube speaks of an era when humanity pushed technology to its limits and paid the price in blood and saltwater. By the end of the war, more than 750 German submarines had been lost, and over 30,000 submariners had died in service. Their survival rate was one of the lowest of any branch of the German military, worse even than Luftwaffe bomber crews. Each U-boat that sank beneath the Atlantic took with it dozens of men, trapped in darkness far from home. The machines that once symbolized stealth and fear now stand as memorials to those who never returned. Today, the story of the U-boats does not end with their destruction. It endures in the silence of the ocean floor. The surviving museum ships and the wrecks resting beneath the waves tell two sides of the same story, one of innovation and ambition, and one of tragedy and loss. The legacy of Hitler's submarine fleet is a paradox. It represents both the height of wartime technology and the depths of human suffering. The steel hulls that once carried destruction across the Atlantic now serve as silent teachers, reminders of how far mankind can go in pursuit of dominance, and how far it can fall. What do you think these relics truly represent? Technological progress or the haunting cost of war? If you enjoyed this video, remember to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more deep dives into the untold history of World War II. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.